Alright, everybody, welcome to Hearth of the Cards, Hearthstone podcast for TGTforce Network. Check it out at TGTforceNetwork.com and expect this episode to be up on Friday, although if you're listening to it, you already know that. So we'll jump into the Grand Tournament that is Saturday, and this episode will be mostly Grand Tournament stuff. It'll be from 3 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Once again, Saturday on the 12th. Prizes will be announced. By the time you listen to this, they'll be up on Reddit, and they'll be from first to third place. So Reddit/r/TForce Network. Entries free, and all are invited to participate. Participation will close probably a couple hours before the tournament. So if you're hearing this and the tournament hasn't started, I would go sign up as soon as you can. Expect best of 3 until the semifinals. And then we'll switch into Conquest format, which we'll be touching on a little bit in this episode. But you should expect to bring at least 4 different classes, so 1 deck for each of those classes. If you have any questions before the tournament, feedback at hearthofthecards.com or HearthOTC on Twitter with more questions. And it'll be streamed on twitch.tv/TForcePodcast, and the games will likely be on YouTube as well. So we're kind of going to jump into tournament prep. Hearthstone hasn't been around for a long time, and we have a lot of new players writing into the podcast and listening to the podcast. So we're kind of going to touch on maybe some things you don't know about tournaments or things you should expect kind of going into your first tournament, especially with Conquest format, as it is a very different format than any other tournament I've seen in any other game. So I'll ask Vom or Alex, I'll kind of leave this open. What decks should you be looking to bring to a tournament for best of 3 or Conquest format?
Well, when you do you want to do it?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so when you're trying to decide what decks you want to bring, you want to try to do one of 2 things. The first option is to try to make your deck have like synergy with each other, but that's kind of hard to do. So the other option that most people do is they try to target a specific archetype. Like you have 3 decks that are really good against aggro, or 3 decks that are really good against control. So if your opponent brings either of those decks, all 3 of your decks will have a pretty favorable matchup against it, and you can try to cheese out a win against that deck.
Yep. If you're new, I think one thing people do mistakenly is that they bring decks that they don't play that much. So even if you don't have the best decks, you should definitely just play whatever you're most comfortable with, because you kind of know all the situations when you play a deck more.
Also, for your deck choices, you should try to pick classes that have a wide variety of possible decks. Such as if you pick Warlock, there's probably like 3 different options that it could be. One, it could be Malagos Warlock, Zulok, or Handlock. So if you bring an ambiguous deck, then people will have a hard time trying to counter that with their decks.
I like the idea. That's pretty cool.
And in Patreon, you get to see all 4 decks, and you get to ban 1 class, but you don't get to see what the deck is before you ban the class. So if you do have one of those ambiguous decks, then the guy really has to question, am I trying to ban out aggro and zoo, or am I trying to ban out handlock? But he really doesn't know, so he doesn't get to make that choice. He just gets to say, I don't want to play Warlock, and I don't know what this is. And that's not really a great choice for him to have. So, a lot of people kind of write in and ask, what are some good low-cost decks? And that's a question we've frequently been getting. So we'll kind of answer it as far as the tournament's concerned. What are some... If you guys only had 2,000 dust to make a deck for the tournament, what deck would you bring?
So the best low-cost deck is definitely Grim Patron Warrior. The list that I run is only 800 dust, not including Naxxramas and Blackrock Mountain. So for the Grim Patron Warrior, you'll need the first 4 wings of Naxxramas in order to get the Death Spite, and the first wing of Blackrock to get the Grim Patron Emperor, which is pretty reasonable.
Yep. A lot of aggressive decks are good too. Aggro Paladin, aggressive or mid-range Hunter, Tempo Mage, Zulok. They're all very low dust, and they're all pretty strong.
I like Hybrid Hunter quite a bit. It's cheap, and it's not Face Hunter, and oftentimes you can skip Boom in a Hybrid Hunter list. So that's kind of what I'd bring. But every deck we've covered for Deck of the Week has been relatively cheap, and the deck we'll be covering this week that Vom just touched on, Patron, is relatively cheap as well. So look back; those are on the Hearth of the Cards YouTube, and if you follow on Twitter, you can find those. So if you want to learn about these decks before the tournament, there will be gameplay up. So, as far as the best of three is concerned, that's what you should expect until the semifinals. So, Vaughn's played in a few tournaments, and he's going to give you guys some advice on what you should expect in a best of three.
So in a best of three, both people have to just randomly pick the first classes. So what happens is both people will usually try to either predict what their opponent will pick and try to pick the counter that, or they just pick their deck that has the most favorable matchups against their decks. If you have a deck like Grim Patron Warrior, then that's generally a pretty good idea to lead with, since that doesn't really have bad matchups.
Yeah, Grim Patron's very draw dependent. I mean, if you draw what you need, you probably win. If you draw what you don't, you don't. But it's usually about 50% in every matchup because it's just a really strong deck. So that's best of three. Best of three is pretty simple. The first person to win 2 games wins, and it'll be blind as far as this tournament's concerned. So just bring a strong deck. If you want to counter, you don't know what the opponent's playing. Once we do jump into the semis, there'll be 4 classes, and you'll get an opportunity to ban one. So you'll have a relative idea of what your opponent's probably playing, or at least the classes. And we're going to touch on what you should expect in Conquest and some tips for Conquest.
Oh,
Yeah.
well,
You got it. You got it.
so one piece of advice for when you're actually playing the games is to have a notepad beside you and just keep track of what cards your opponent has played, just so you can know like what you don't have to play around anymore, or what cards you still have to play around because they haven't played it. And so for Conquest, you want to see like what decks maybe have the win conditions that are worst against your decks, like that'll beat down your decks the most. So say you have Priest decks and they have Warlock. If that's Handlock, you could get like wrecked pretty hard. So you might want to ban out the Handlock if your Priest is one of the weaker decks in your list.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I think you should also keep track of the cards that you have. Sometimes you really need to fish for something, and if you know how many cards you have left and how many copies of the card you want, you can kind of guess the odds. Sometimes it's worth fishing for something if you really need it. Sometimes it's kind of just like it'll really help you win, but you don't absolutely need it, and you should just write down what cards you already drew so you knew.
And that's
And that
kind of... Oh, sorry.
That tip kind of goes back again to what Horace was saying earlier with making sure you play your decks before you go to the tournament, because that way you know what those things you're fishing for are and why that they're important. If it's something that you haven't really played a lot, you may not have come into those situations where uh, where you can think of why you need that card and why you're fishing for it. So it's really important to play out the decks you're going to bring ahead of time. That way you have some ideas of what you're going to be seeing and what types of plays that you want to hold a card, or maybe try to maybe not put as much emphasis on a certain card that maybe in other matchups than you would.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
I think
think
that's
that's one
exactly
of-
what I was going to say.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, it's fine.
I think that's one of the reasons why some decks are very strong, but people have a lot of trouble just first picking them up. Decks like Grim Patron Warrior and Handlock, well, the old Handlock, they used to both get to really low health, and a lot of times if you're unfamiliar with the deck, you get really uncomfortable with being at like 5 HP.
Mhm.
But you kind of just have to play the deck so you can get used to things like that, and so you know like when it's okay to be really low health and when it's not.
Yep, I think that's good advice.
Also, if you're pretty new at the game, you'll probably want to pick decks that don't have a lot of hard decisions to make. So you want the ones that have a pretty like linear play style, such as Hunter, which is just to try to kill the opponent before he like just gets to late game, and or something like Aggro Paladin, which also has about the same play style. Unlike something like Handlock, where one, you want to be low enough to play Molten Giants, but not too low that you'll get bursted. Two, you want a lot of cards in your hand, but you don't want to tap to bring yourself too low. Or three, you don't know when to board clear and when to just play your minions. So hard decisions like that make decks hard to play, and if you're new to the game, you should probably stick to easier decks.
Yeah, and Patron too can sometimes be difficult if you're not paying attention to the math, because that a lot of times is you're looking for just taking out your opponent right away, and so you got to be able to calculate all that in your head, during that turn, or trying to set up the next turn where you're going to have all that math in your head. So make sure that you have some of those certain combos kind of memorized, because some certain combos that you do are going to be obviously the same math each and every time. So that goes back again to what was said earlier about having some idea of how the deck plays.
And what we touched on last episode with technical cards, you may want to tech out some of your decks for tournaments. We talked about the meta report last episode as well, and you can kind of expect that you'll be playing likely Secret Paladin, likely Patron Warrior, and likely some of the strong decks. So if you guys were entering a tournament right now, what technical cards would you be looking for, and what decks would you be looking to put them in? Aggro, mid-range, or control?
If I was running mid-range hunter, I would definitely be trying to at least put one flare in. That hoping, because you still at least get a card draw regardless of whether or not you're playing against a paladin. But the paladin with the secrets is just so strong right now that I would expect to see that one. And it doesn't seem to necessarily cost a whole lot to make. I could be wrong. I haven't looked at the numbers.
I think it's really hard to play Freeze Mage right now because everyone's running Flare.
Yeah, I've been trying to play Freeze Maze lately, and my previous list had 2 Flame Strikes, and it was more for like a grindy deck. But I tried playing it lately, and it just been getting swarmed. So I've actually made some changes. I took out 1 Flame Strike and put in Explosive Sheep, and it's been working pretty well. But the fact that hunters have started running Flare again has made Freeze Mage a lot weaker for me.
Mm-hmm. And
so Flare is a pretty good card to attack in because it's good against both Paladin and Mage as well as the Hunter itself.
Yep, and Freeze Mage, Hunter, and Secrets Paladin are 3 pretty strong decks that you're likely to encounter in a tournament. So that makes Flare a strong technical card. Any other technical cards? Maybe Kazan Mystic or Harrison Jones that you guys would be running?
Yeah, Kazan Mystic as well. But Kazan Mystic isn't too good against Paladin because the one mana secret is kind of underwhelming just to steal, and they'll have like 5 up at a time.
Mm-hmm. I've been running Harrison in my mid-range druid lately.
Yeah, Harrison's good because there's lots of Patron Warrior.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't like aggro, Wild Pyromancer is actually one of the best anti-aggro cards in the game. Unstable Ghoul is pretty up there. Basically anything that does 1 damage to the entire board is amazing against aggro, since aggressive decks, a lot of the minions have 1 health.
Unstable Sheep and Mage is very good against aggro.
I
mean Explosive Sheep.
Explosive Sheep and Dreadsteed Warlock.
Oh my god.
Alright, so we're going to jump into week in review. We'll talk about Dreadsteed Warlock a little bit. But first off and foremost, our arena deck from episode 2. If you didn't see on Twitter, the deck ended up going 10-3. So we're kind of going to talk about what happened in the draft. And for you guys, 10-3 is a relatively good result. But you can kind of always look back on why a deck didn't go 12. So, well, what do you guys think happened in the draft? As far as like the good and the bad.
Really strong minions, no board clear. I think we had a lot of late game, but not having board clear to back that up to keep the board clear for your late game is kind of bad.
Mm-hmm. And what happened in game? Because when you evaluate arena, you're evaluating 2 parts. You're evaluating your draft phase, and you're evaluating what happened in game. So like draft phase, let's say you draft like 10 4s. And you end up with a handful of 4s. Maybe next time you go into arena, it's I take that Swamp Ooze over this Chill Wind once I already have 6 4s because I need to have a lower curve or something like that. And that's evaluating your draft phase. As far as evaluating what happened in game, Vom, you played the deck. What did you see happen?
Yeah, so I played the deck, and what basically happened was we had a pretty strong curve in that deck, so I mostly just played minions on curve. And if they were really favorable trades for me, then I'd take them. But if they were just like a 1-for-1 trade, then I typically just forego that and just hit face. Since after TGT, the arena playstyle has changed a lot because board clears are less common, so you can afford to not play around board clears as much and just hit them in the face. And also, we did draft the legendary Edric the Pure, and when we were able to play that, it generally did a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of a weird card to play in Constructed, but it's a card that certainly gets a lot of value. And Arena is much more value-based than Constructed at times. So, TGT also been out for a few weeks now, 3 or 4, somewhere around that. But new stuff is happening every week. The meta's changing, although more slowly now. Any new cards or decks that we've seen since last week? I think Chris talked about a Frost Giant Mage.
Yeah, I was watching a stream, and I think it was there was
There was a last call qualifiers for
I think so,
BlizzCon.
yeah. And it was Rage versus Raynad, and who are two of the professional players that were trying to make that. And Rage brought Frost Giant into his mage, and I guess I haven't like I've been playing for I don't know probably close to a year, if not or since 20 yeah. And so but I haven't been competitively playing until like the last couple months, like putting it seriously. So I don't know all of the previous meta, like some of these guys will. But I guess giants were a thing for a while, where where they were putting out a lot of molten giants and stuff with mage, and is what it sounded like. And they what they were talking about on the stream was that it saw really interesting how he decided to use Frost Mage, which, if you're not familiar with it, then it's a 10 cost and you can 8/8. And what happens is throughout the game, every time you use your hero power, then the cost for that Frost Mage goes down, or Frost Giant goes down by 1. And so what he was playing was those Frost Giants, and they get down to, I don't know, 3 or sometimes even 0. And he would drop them, and then he would play Duplicate, and it would also duplicate at whatever he dropped at. And then I think he would even keep, I don't remember exactly, but and maybe you guys know for sure, but I think he would keep even dropping as he kept playing his hero power. So it was really interesting. Like, spoiler alert that, so pause if you want to. Okay, here it is. That he actually lost to the Freeze Mage, but it was a really interesting play, and it looked like a lot of fun. He actually used the Molten Giants with it too, but it was and also the Duplicate Secret as well to keep getting tons of giants. It was really, or tons of mages. It was really tons of giants. That's the first thing. I keep reading it wrong. My bad.
Molten Giant Duplicate Mage was a thing, but it wasn't a thing that got played a lot.
Okay.
It was mostly just like a cheese factor because they think it's freeze mage, so they just try to bring you down really low as fast as possible, and you just like spamming out molten giants, and they're like, what the hell?
Yeah,
Which
and
makes
use
sense.
Echo Medivh.
Okay, which makes sense because that's kind of what they were talking about too when they were mentioning it, that he was trying to mind game him a bit and have him. I think he was going with Freeze Mage.
Mm-hmm. And for those of you listening, Molten Giant, it costs 20, but the cost is reduced by 1 for every damage you've taken. So you can't even play it until you hit 20 health. But on decks where you float on low health, like Handlock and Freeze Mage, it's a really strong card. And it is an 8/8. So all the Giants are 8/8. But anything that's happened in game, or like, I guess specific cards we've seen on the ladder, or changes in decks. I see notes on Argent Watchman for Arena.
Yeah, I've actually been playing a lot of Arena lately, and Argent Watchman is something that I've found to be pretty good in Mage, actually. You can play it out early, and the ping and the 2/4 body can just take care of a lot of our early minions. So even though it may not be top tier, it's certainly not a garbage card or a troll card.
Mm-hmm. And
even though the 2/4 and can't attack seems kind of stupid.
It's a 2/4, and it cannot attack. And the Inspire, so when you use your hero powers that it can attack, so you have to use your hero power to get it to attack. But I think most people generally thought that was a bad card, but I guess it's good in Arena. Specifically Mage. I think that's what the note is. From what I've seen a lot of Mech Mage again, and I kind of stopped seeing Mech Mage completely when TGT came out. Much more aggressive list isn't even running Archmage now, but they're running Blood Knight, and it works on your own shielded mini bot. We talked about Blood Knight
attack. Shielded mini bot,
Anoyatron, yeah. Last episode, it's a technical card. For every Divine Shield, it kills that Divine Shield, and then you get +3/+3. So if you use it on your own Anoyatron, you get a 6/6. Paladin's very popular right now, so you can just get a 6/6 off a mini bot, or a 9/9 off the mini bot in the little Argent 1/1. So I've seen that again, and I've seen the Refreshment Vendor in a few control decks. It kind of makes sense though. In those decks, you aren't worrying about your opponent's health at turn 4, turn 5, and 3/4 restore 4 health, as opposed to the
3/5, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a 3/5.
Oh, 3/5. I'm sorry. Restore 4 health to your hero, as opposed to the what's the card everyone's running right now? 3/3 restore 8.
Restore 8. Oh, Healbot?
Yeah, as opposed to Healbot, you're getting 4 less health, but it costs 1 less, and you're getting +2 health. So it seems decent.
Yep.
So you can
and the
potentially
body's way
trade
better.
with them more often too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Trades with Shredder. And that's kind of like what the meta is really influenced right now, whether you can trade with Shredder or not if you're on a 3 or 4. And if you can trade with Shredder at 3-1, I mean, that's pretty strong.
Yeah, I changed my mind about Ronin. I used to hate him, and now I just strongly dislike Ronin. I don't think he's completely useless. I thought Varian would be better than Ronin, but after seeing some of the decks and seeing Ronin and Tempo Mage, it definitely does help, and I think it's an okay late game card, even though I still don't like him.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a few questions, and we figured we'd kind of just briefly touch on the decks we're playing. We won't talk about them too much, as they may be future deck of the weeks, and we kind of want to jump into some more tournament stuff. But right now, I'm playing Dragon Druid and Dreadsteed Warlock. And Dreadsteed's a 4/4, 4 mana 1/1, and the Death Rattle summon another Dreadsteed. And it's I mean, it just has a lot of taunts and heals, and you try not to die, and you get like 5 Dreadsteeds, and just kind of win through that. But anybody else decks that they're playing right now?
Well, I've been playing a lot of mage variants, such as Freeze Mage, Tempo Mage, Mech Mage. I just like mage a lot in general because the deck is so versatile. And also, I've been playing some Patient Warrior lately as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've been playing Dragon Priest. It's been pretty fun. And because especially when I just want to be really like just sit back and just be like you can't do anything because I feel like being that way for that day, then I just play that because all the aggro stuff has a hard time dealing with all the taunts, and just makes me kind of fill in that sadistic part of my soul and makes me feel good. So I play that. And then when I want to be just even more of an ass, then I just try to play some Hunter. And so that's what I've been playing too. But I've been doing mid range. I haven't been doing face hunter, but still, it still feels dirty sometimes.
I see you're running
And then
Ram
for
Wrangler.
fun, yeah, I run Rambling Wrangler. I dropped him down to 1 because I felt like I wasn't. I felt like I was. He was just kind of having 2 was dead sometimes, and so. But it's pretty fun, especially like when you get like a King Crusher, you get like an Alexstrasza, or not Alexstrasza. That's not obviously that's a dragon.
Gazrella.
Yeah, Godzilla. Yeah,
Oh,
that's
that's
always,
awesome.
those both are pretty fun.
I cut
I'm
Ram
getting
Wrangler
that.
from my list.
Did you? I like I said, I just brought him down to 1.
Mm-hmm.
So.
It's a fun
also
card.
mid druid. It is fun. Yeah. I'm still not sure if it's. I can see why you cut. I don't know if it's. Sometimes it feels really slow, and I have that, and just like that's not the card I need right now. So.
It's kind of like Beta Doom.
But
My 2 issues with it are Web Spinner is a 1/1 for 1, and you get a beast in your hand, and that's a 3/3 for 5. So you're paying 4 mana on a card that you might not even get to play for 5 for 2/2 in stats, and to have the beast on the field instead of in your hand. But once again, like a 5 you might not get to play, whereas the 1/1 you always get to play. And like the other big issue I have with it is on Hunter. I play a lot of mid-range Hunter. You want to have priority on the board before 6. Like, you want to have as much control on the board as possible before you play high main. Because if high main hits face once when you're playing mid-range Hunter, you probably win. And sometimes you just break your beast and you don't have board control. Whereas, like, if I have Loatheb in hand, I'm always playing Loatheb. Or if I have, like, a 5-drop that actually, like a Belcher, and I can control board with Belcher and protect my high main, I'd always rather have the Belcher.
yeah, I could see replacing the Belcher for it. Especially when I play it and I get the Timberwolf, which is a 1/1 beast, and my other beasts have 1 attack, but it only does it to like 1 beast, and it just doesn't do anything. So I think it's one of those things where sometimes it's almost like a gamble, like a 50-50. Am I going to win this game or am I not going to win this game? And so which is not necessarily the best if you're trying to ladder, because there's games that you could be more consistent with if you didn't play it. But I don't know. I'm still trying it out for a while to see because it seems like a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it is a really fun card. And I think I have a golden one. So like,
Do you really? That's cool.
I have a golden Ramlinger and a golden Bane of Doom.
Does it drop then the
Golden
whatever
Beast,
drops
yes.
is gold? That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, those cards are like, if you have a limited collection and you want as many gold cards as you can get in your deck, crafting the cards that create other cards like Unstable Portal and Bane of Doom and stuff like that, just a mere entity, you just get so many golds for so little dust. They're really fun cards.
Yeah, it is really cool. Justicar Trueheart, I didn't know that if you have a gold one of that, it changes the hero power to gold then too.
Mm-hmm.
Also, with Just the God True Heart, since it replaces your hero power, you can hero power before you play it, and then hero power again.
That's
I
so
did that today.
toxic.
It was so awesome.
Especially if you're a warrior, you just randomly gain 6 health in
Yeah,
one turn.
that's
Oh
what it
my
was.
God.
It was when I was playing as a warrior.
So what decks we're seeing, I'm kind of going to run through everybody just so we don't say the same thing like 5 times. But it looks like mostly Secret Paladin, Hunter, Mech Mage, Dragon Priest, and Alex is seeing some Tempo Rogue, and we're seeing a little bit of Warrior. I think that's mostly it. So speaking of Tempo Rogue, we're going to touch on Tempo for the newbie tip of the week. So anybody kind of want to explain briefly what Tempo is? We touched on episode 1, but after we explain what it is, I'm going to talk about why we're talking about it again. 1, because it's really important, but 2, because we got a listener question. So, Tempo.
Yeah, I can explain it. So basically, the idea in Hearthstone is that if a card costs more mana, it's stronger than the cards that cost less mana. So you kind of want to play cards that have higher mana on an empty board, and to do that, you need to trade efficiently. So it's kind of like Tempo is like the idea that each turn you'll play a stronger card. Like on turn 1, you'll play a 1 mana card. The next turn, you play 2 mana. And then if you have that initiative where you're playing the card on an empty board, that's Tempo.
And one of the questions we got from Michael, and you can ask questions at feedback@hearthofthecards.com if you guys have some. But his question was, going second, he's getting the coin. The coin is 0 mana and it gives you 1 mana crystal. I'm sure you all know that though, so I'm not going to touch on it too much. But he's asking when he should use the coin for tempo advantage. Should he use the coin on turn 1 to get a 2-drop, or turn 2? Turn 1 to get a 2-drop, then a 2-drop on 2, then a 3-drop on 3? Or should he don't turn 1, coin turn 2, drop turn 2? I don't know. Basically, he's asking if he should coin right away, or if he should save the coin for later in the game, or kind of how you trade coin for tempo.
You were actually just reading my response there, not his question.
Oh, okay. So, I'm really sorry. All right. So, do you prefer to go first or second? Let's answer that first.
I like going second.
I like going second as well.
Yeah, I do too.
And why do you guys like going second?
The coin is really nice. It makes your plays more versatile, so if your mana curve isn't that great, you have the coin to kind of even it out a bit. And also, when you go second, you get an extra mulligan, so it just makes your hand overall a little better.
Yeah, that's one thing I really like too, is the extra mulligan, so that way you can kind of have a better idea of how you're going to curve out during the first 4 turns of the game.
Are there any decks that you really, really want to go second on? Or are there any decks you really, really want to go first on?
You really, really want to go second if you're playing Rogue.
And why is that?
Because you have the coin to activate combos.
And combos are the rogue specific mechanics. So he's talking about things like Eviscerate or coin SI7 agent on turn 2, which will give you a 3/3 body and likely clear whatever they have on the board. Because it is a 3/3 for 3 and the combos deal 2 damage. Really, really strong card. So any decks you prefer to go first on?
Anything aggro, I would say, like aggro paladin or aggro hunter, then or face hunter. If you want to, you just want to get, like, you're generally going to be running a lot of 1-drops, and so you should likely be getting one in your first hand, and you just want to start putting the tempo out there where you're going to be hitting face and hitting more face.
Yeah, aggro paladin's pretty good because especially if you're running like the true Ebola version, you have like 8 1-drops and you're probably gonna get one. So
Yeah, also handlock for sure. It's really awkward to go second as handlock, because normally you tap every turn, but if you go second, the coin takes up a slot in your hand. So on turn 3, I think you're down 1 mana before you can play Mountain Giant, but if you tap, then you're gonna burn a card. So it's just super awkward. I always like going first with handlock.
But if you're going second with handlock, if you have Zombie Chow, it can make your curve pretty nice.
Yeah, that's true, but I'm not that lucky, so.
Never lucky, baby rage. Join the club.
Alright, so I guess the second part of the question is, if you go second, when is it a good time to use the coin or the mana crystal?
So you should just use the mana crystal if you have a good follow-up play for the following turn as well. So like if you have two drops in your hand that are both good, you can coin out the two on one and then the second one play it on two. But if you just coin it out and you can't really do anything next turn except for hero power, then you probably should save the coin for when you have a good follow-up play to capitalize on the tempo advantage you got.
No, I think that's a pretty good answer. Some decks really want coin for other turns too. Like even if I had like a turn one on Rogue, I may save coin for SI or something like that.
What-
Oh, go for it.
What are your guys' opinion about, say, like, because I play a lot of mage, and if I'm going to, let's say I go second, I have a mad scientist, and then I also have a frostbolt, and I'm playing against somebody that I'm assuming I'm going to be wanting to maybe frostbolt on turn two, but I don't know that for sure. Do you think it would be helpful to coin out the mad scientist and then hope for the frostbolt, or just save it for a second round for the
What
frostbolt?
deck though? Like
Let's say it's tempo mage for the first.
If you're
for
playing
the
tempo
first-
mage, you want to keep the coin to like combo a flame waker, so you probably wouldn't do that.
Okay. What about like freeze mage?
If you're playing freeze mage, it depends on the matchup. If you're playing an aggro matchup, you'll want to coin it out because ping will probably take care of another minion as well. Or if they play like a creeper and hunter, you can kill the creeper and ping off one of the spiders. But if you're playing against like warrior, you're definitely not going to coin it out.
Yep. Okay. That's
Well,
what I
I
was
mean-
thinking too, but I wanted to double check.
If you're playing freeze mage against warrior, you should probably just press escape and concede.
True. That matchup is so not good for freeze mage.
Anybody want to touch on why that matchup is so bad?
Armor.
So Free Mage is kind of a deck that's built to do like a certain amount of damage, and they use a card called Alex Straza, which brings your opponent to 15 health. But Alex Straza ignores armor, so if your opponent has 15 health and 20 armor, they still effectively have 35 health, and Freeze Mage really struggles to deal with that. So just kind of being able to negate Alex Straza with armor is the answer to that. Third part to this question. Oh.
I feel
no,
like
no.
there's like a Alex Straza flames can't melt warrior armor dreams joke to be made, but I can't think of the rhyme.
Oh,
I thought-
yeah.
I think in the early days of Hearthstone, Alex Straza actually got rid of armor, so you could like play Gorehowl and then
Oh,
Alex
really?
Straza, and then you charge the Alex Straza and just Gorehowl and Alex Straza their face because charge was the 0 mana card back then. They just gave charge.
Sounds real balanced.
It was.
Yeah, I bet.
All right, so kind of we explained what tempo is when we answered a couple questions about coin, and coin really does relate to tempo. One of the big things about tempo too is mana advantage and getting favorable trades. So does somebody kind of want to talk about that, especially as it relates to arena, like getting 2-for-1s and how that relates to tempo?
Sure. So one of the big ideas in Arena is if you can manage to use one card to get rid of two cards of your opponent's cards, then you'll win the game. It's kind of like the idea that if your opponent doesn't have any cards, then he won't really be able to hurt you except for his hero power, but that probably won't kill you. So when you play Arena, a lot of like people try to keep board and kind of trade one card for two card. There's like the Argent Charge creature that's like a 3 mana 2/1 with Divine Shield, and even though the stats are super weak, what it does is it'll usually trade with a card and then it'll force out something else. So cards like that are super valuable because you always want to use one card to get rid of more cards.
And even if it gets hero powered or something, let's say it's the 2/1 with charge with Divine Shield, and it kills a Knife Juggler, which is 2 mana, and it gets hero powered, and you say, he lost a 2 mana card and I lost a 3 mana card. Well, it's kind of what happened, but he also used ping, so he's losing 4 mana to get rid of your 3 mana, and you're getting 1 mana worth of tempo as long as you have something to play. And that's kind of how, as far as tempo is concerned and not like card advantage, that's kind of how that works. If you 2-for-1 and you 2-for-1 8 mana worth of stuff with your 5 mana worth of stuff, you should have 3 more mana to just establish board and get tempo.
Yeah, whenever I teach new people Arena, a lot of new people just make this mistake where they'll use like they'll see a 2-drop or something and they'll frostbolt it instead of using the hero power to get rid of it, like a loot hoarder or something. And it's like you always want to save cards when you can. So if you can get rid of someone's card, you want to do it in the least amount of cards possible. And if you have a weapon or something, that's why sometimes you don't really like waste the weapon on their face. It's because you don't want to use if like if you could have the choice to take damage and get rid of your opponent's cards, unless it would kill you, you would do that 100% of the time.
hmm And I think weapons are a really good example of tempo. We kind of talk about the strongest classes in Arena, and Rogue is number one as far as average wins is concerned, especially in the hands of a skilled player.
It wasn't it two?
2 or 1.
Paladin was one.
All right, so it's up there. But anyone kind of want to talk about why the Rogue hero power is so good in terms of tempo compared to the other ones, even though sometimes it feels bad to be taking damage?
So the rogue hero power it is equips a 1/2 dagger, which means that the weapon has one attack and it has 2 charges, so you can attack twice. It's pretty similar to the mage hero power in that it also does 1 damage, but the thing with rogue is that you can do it twice with only 2 mana, as opposed to mage where you only do it once for 1 damage with 2 mana. And like because it's a weapon, you have to hit your face into something, which takes damage. But early damage in arena is pretty irrelevant because what matters in arena is board control. If you have the board, you can do favorable trades and hit them in the face with minions that didn't have to attack, which in the long run will do more damage than if you had just like pressed the weapon and hit them in the face, or just had a mage thing and pinged it and had to waste 2 mana every turn pinging instead of 2 mana every other turn to equip a dagger.
And it's kind of what we talked about in the first episode. There are 3 resources, and you're often exchanging them with each other. And the Rogue hero power, you're exchanging tempo for life. You're getting more tempo than the Mage hero power, but you're exchanging life as a result of that. So I think most weapons are a pretty good example of that. Fiery War Axe, True Silver Champion. Oftentimes you're killing like 7 mana worth of stuff with your 4 mana weapon, but as a result, you're trading life for mana crystals, which is often tempo.
Ogre Wormhole Kappa.
Yep, Ogre Wormhole. I get so many of those in GVG Arena. At one point, I stopped playing Arena because it's like I'm sick of getting golden Ogre Wormholes.
I have 2.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's basically it. We'll jump into deck of the week. The deck of the week is probably one of the strongest, if not the second strongest deck right now besides Secret Paladin, and it's called Grim Patron Warrior, or as Doom calls it, the copy-pasted deck. So, anyone kind of want to talk about Grim Patron Warrior? Or just, I know Alex, you've played it to Legend, so you want to touch on it briefly and kind of what the deck is about or the win conditions?
Yeah, so you have a couple of win conditions. Against aggressive decks, you kind of just want to make them run out of cards, and then with Armor Smith and all your Whirlwinds and all your creatures, you end up going from like 10 life to around 40, because Warrior is awesome like that. And then in more control matchups or mid-range matchups, you kind of just want to pile on cards and pile up mana until you have the ability to either flood the board against Druid, because Druid doesn't really run that much removal, or just one-shot them. I think people complain about that a lot, but you definitely kind of, if you have the opportunity to, you definitely want to wait until you can completely kill your opponent. It's like you have to double tap them. You don't want to just shoot one bullet and then hope it works. You gotta kill them.
And it's kind of a mistake some people make when they play Patron. Maybe just doing 20 of your opponent's life and kind of leaving stuff on board, and maybe using like a Frothing or a Grim Patron. And your win conditions, he kind of talked about the Patron and the Frothing Berserker. You only have 2 of each, and most Patron decks don't run a lot of these, I guess, high cost cards that win the game in most decks. So if you lose those cards, it's really hard to, I guess, win. But I think Emperor usage is something we should touch on in respect to that, and maybe not jumping the gun.
Yeah, one of the biggest mistakes I see with people playing Patron Warrior is they'll play Emperor like just because they can play it and they have cards. If you play Emperor but you don't actually have any combo pieces, it's kind of useless. Because your combo costs quite a bit of mana in order to actually like one-shot them. Because the Warsong's 3, Grim Patron's 5, Frothing is 3. So if you can get that reduced, then you'll be able to spam like Whirlwinds as well, because Whirlwinds are only 1 mana, and after you reduce it, you'll have like 4 to spend. But if you don't reduce it, you'll be pretty crunched for mana to try to one-shot them with the cards that you have. So basically, you want to play your Emperor when you have your combo pieces in hand, such as like at least one Grim Patron or Frothing Berserker, your War Song, and one or two whirlwind effects, rather than just play it when you have a handful of draw mechanics.
And Grim Patron's an interesting deck because it is one of the harder decks, and we've touched on that. But it's also one of the easiest decks for new players to acquire. Most Grim Patron lists I see run from like 600 to 800 dust. The one we'll be posting is 800 dust. But you do need a few expansion cards. So, Chris, you kind of want to jump into those?
Yeah, so some of the things that you want to first get then would be Unstable Ghoul and Death Spite, and that comes in the first 4 wings of Naxxramas. And then also you want to get Emperor I always say it wrong. Thaurissan, right? Thaurissan?
No,
I call it
oh my God,
Thaurissan.
that was
Thaurissan?
so wrong.
I don't even know. So Thaurissan, that sounds better. And also the obviously Grim Patron, and that comes out of the first wing of Blackrock Mountain. So you're going to have to be able to get both of those different expansions in order to be able to play this. Excuse me. One thing to add on to Death Bite is that, and going back to a little bit to what we were talking about with setting things up and with Emperor and everything, is with Death Bite you need to think at least one turn ahead of when you want to be able to have the whirlwind mechanic of it. So that's one thing one of the reasons why this deck is harder is you have to think ahead. It's not so much just what do I have right now, what am I going to do, and so it's not just playing it either. You got to make sure that you have it to where it's going to release that charge once you play your Grim Patron.
With the deck, you have to manage so many things. Like one, you have to manage your life total because there are a lot of aggressive decks out there. Two, you have to manage your weapon, like conserve your Death Spite whirlwind charge. Three, you have to conserve your win conditions such as whirlwinds, your Grim Patrons, your War Song Commander, and your Frothing Berserkers. And four, you have to make sure that you don't get totally wrecked on board because you don't have any AoE removal.
So if I was a new player, I'm sorry.
Real quick, also too, sometimes you can underestimate cards that may even just be what actually wins you the game. Like Armor Smith can be really key in different matchups because she can set you up to get so much armor and be able to keep you alive long enough to be able to get your combo out and then win you the game. Whereas without a proper use of her, you're not going to be getting enough armor off of her ability, and you're also not going to be able to live long enough.
One of the things with Armor Smith use is if you can use the card well, you'll beat Freeze Mage. If you can't, you'll just get totally raffle stomped by Freeze Mage. Like if you just randomly play it on 2, the Freeze Mage can just remove it pretty easily, and you'll probably only gain 2 armor. Whereas if you keep it until you do a big Grim Patron play, you gain like 20 armor off of that, and they won't be able to one-shot you with his spells anymore.
And we kind of talked about the Freeze Mage Alex Shelza interaction with armor earlier. So if you need a refresh, you can go back and check on that. But if I was a new player and I was taking this into a tournament, let's say I queued up for a game, I crafted my cards, I finished Nax, what would I be looking for in my first hand as far as mulligans are concerned?
If you can get a Fiery War Axe, you always want that, like every time.
Yeah, weapons. You want card draw, acolytes. Sometimes you want Armor Smith if it's an aggressive deck, but like Chris said, you definitely want to save that Armor Smith in certain matchups. And even against aggressive ones, if you can save it, it'll get you more life in the end. So.
So I think that covers mulligan. I noticed that when I played it, oftentimes I would just mulligan really aggressively for War Axe. But synergies. What are, I guess, the basic combos in the deck? We kind of touched on them, but I guess touching on the 2 big ones a little more in depth.
The 2 big combos are just the War Song Commander along with your Patrons because they have 3 attacks, so each new one will get charged as well. And Frothing because that is 2, so it'll get charged and once it hits the board, and it will keep charge even though it's going to be gaining so much attack from having Whirlwinds, which is another synergy in your deck. Because the 1 damage can increase the Frothing's attack by 1 for each minion that it hits. And 1 damage will damage a patron and spawn a new patron as well.
I think that I guess another newbie tip of the week and something that's really relevant to patron is remember to use your draw cards first if you're going to use your draw cards in a turn. Or let's say you have an Acolyte and they have a 1/1. Remember to attack that 1/1 before you do anything. Same for Warlock if you think you're going to tap. I've been guilty of this before. But it's really important to draw first when you can, and patrons certainly in that boat.
Yeah, speaking of that, I think another mistake I remember doing and teaching a lot of people not to do is you should think out all of your turns. Like you should think out all the cards that you're going to play. I know that when I first started, I would kind of just play whatever and then see what it looked like afterwards, but it's not a good idea.
Yeah, like you have 90 seconds per turn to plan out your turn and to do it. Like you don't have to be like life coach about it, but you can take like 30 seconds just to think about what you're going to do before you do it.
And life coach is that player we all hate in the ladder. He ropes every turn. And if you're a new player, roping is when the rope appears on the screen because your opponent or you're taking too long. So roping means taking way too long on a turn.
But if you're older like me and you have kids and you're like doing stuff in between turns sometimes because you just have to, then sometimes you can get some easy wins because people get really pissed, especially if you're going against a mech mage and they don't have the patience to be able to deal with all the ropes, and so you can sometimes get some free wins that way. Just a side tip.
Or if you're
Hashtag
Vom.
cancer strats.
Or if you're
right?
Vom. Yeah. No, if you're Vom, roping just means like watching anime and not paying attention to the game.
Yep.
The anime rope.
So don't try it against me because I'll be watching anime.
All right.
No, that definitely works. Sometimes when I'm playing an aggressive deck and I'm in like full cancer mode, I'll concede at the drop of a hat. Like if someone ropes turn one, I'll concede. If you're playing warrior, I'll just concede. I just want my games to go by fast, man.
All right. So, listener question, another one from Michael. Kind of getting off the patron. We touched on most of it, and as far as matchups are concerned, we touched on that earlier, but most matchups are pretty good.
On Patreon.
Mm-hmm.
Just real quick, even if you aren't gonna want to play this in a tournament, it's really good to play it like at least a couple times, because then you get even if you aren't gonna play a deck as like one that you want to use, maybe you just don't like it, or maybe it's just not something that you find to be like the hero that you like. It's really good to know how to play against it, and so by playing it yourself, you'll have a lot of ideas of like what win conditions are, what you see, what people are setting up, because you're going to be doing it yourself. So just a good idea even before a tournament is to at least play it a few times to kind of get the feel for it and see and have a better idea what the opponent's doing.
Mm-hmm. I think that's pretty good advice for most games. If you're struggling with or playing against something, just play it a couple of times to kind of see how it works. I recommend that for other games, and Hearthstone's no exception. So, once again, question from Michael. Do themed decks work? I know that most of the people in this are pretty tryhard. I call Vom Kaiba because he dusts all of his weak cards.
Oh my god.
Wow.
I didn't know that.
What a
That is so
hater.
awesome.
What a hater.
And he only keeps the powerful cards. Anything fun, he just calls it 400 dust. Lore Walker chose 400 dust.
You
Well,
also
yeah,
have,
does
you
this
also
like
have a little
craft
brother that
loaded
looks like a
versions of
girl.
full cards.
That's
You also have-
awful.
Do you also have a
Can I
little brother
finish
that looks
my
like a
golden
girl?
freeze?
Alright. So, but fun, cheesy decks. It's specifically the question's themed decks, but we'll kind of touch on cheesy, fun decks. Do they work? Murlocs and Pirates are the two he really wants to know.
Oh,
do work, but they're pretty like really draw reliant.
Mm-hmm. And do you kind of want to touch on that? What draw reliant means, and especially specifically these decks?
Well, like if you don't curve out, you'll get overrun, and if you don't get your win conditions, then you just lose. Because theme decks usually work because you have a lot of cards that work well with each other that'll eventually culminate with like one card that will get a lot of value because you have a lot of those other cards, such as with Murlocs. You have the Murloc Wood Leader, which gives them +2/+1, or Old Murkai, which gets one attack for each other Murloc on the board, which can just do a whole bunch of damage for very cheap. But with
Actually-
pirates, like Ship's Cannon, which will do 2 damage every time you summon a pirate. If you don't get those synergies, the deck has a lot of minions that don't really have good stats for their cost.
I actually think Pirate Rogue is like kind of an exception. It is still draw reliant, but it's a lot less draw reliant than most other Pirate and Murloc decks. And that if you just play a really aggressive Pirate deck, like Ship's Cannon's still 2/3 for 3 if you don't have a Pirate, and you have a lot of 1-mana pirates, so you usually have a Pirate and you can like combo it on turn 3 or something, and you just run a lot of the really valuable cards, and it turns into like almost a face deck, especially with Sky Captain Crag.
I think you can definitely ladder with them up until rank 5 though. If you really enjoy the deck, I think you should still play it. At rank 5, people kind of start slowing down more, and so because there's no bonus streak, so it might not work as well. But but play them. Play what you like.
Yeah, anything works to rank 5 for the most part. But well, not anything, but as long as you're practicing, you just continuing to learn and get better at Hearthstone, you can make most stuff work until 5. 5 to Legend is kind of when it gets really competitive and much harder. Win streaks going away makes it very, very hard as well because you actually have to net wins. With bonus stars, you can win half of your games and just rely on streaks to ladder, which is kind of scary. But I guess the other question... No, we had the coin question and we answered that. So anything else you guys want to touch on? Any other theme decks?
I guess in terms of laddering, don't be afraid to play what you like or that a deck's not good enough. If you're really new, you won't remember this, but Amaz, who's a very famous player, got beat by the basic mage deck on stream.
Really?
So, yep.
And basic mage, if you're a new player, you've probably played basic mage, but if you're a refresher on it, go click pre-made decks and it's basic mage. Or no.
Basic mage deck is the deck it starts you out with.
Okay, yeah. So they certainly work, and some people put a lot of emphasis on cards and pay to win and so on and so forth, but as long as you kind of make valuable trades and you have a deck that can play well on curve and so on and so forth, you certainly don't need like a lot of crazy cards to do well, and you don't need like, I don't know, a perfect curve into Dr. Boom in every deck. You can play Pirates and Murlocs and do fine. I've actually been playing a lot of Dreadsteed Warlock, which is kind of a theme deck, I guess, and it's been going pretty well. A lot of healing, a lot of taunts so I don't die, but it works, and I'm having a lot of fun, so that's certainly the key component.
Also, too, if you're laddering, then another streamer is, and he also is a professional player, is Trump, and he puts out a lot of decks that are just ones that you can get with the basic cards, and so they can be options for you if you're looking for a list to try to see if what are some options to be able to make and try to ladder with.
Yeah, actually, we should touch on new player resources because we had a new player in the network who's been getting a lot of advice recently, and he wasn't using Hearth Arena. So we're going to kind of touch on like the places you should go for, I guess, advice and decks, and the places you should be careful of. Unexpected segment. But Hearth Arena. If you're playing Arena and you're not averaging like 4 or 5 wins or more, you should probably be using Hearth Arena. Really useful site. You type in the choices, it tells you the best card, and not only tells you the best card, but it explains to you why it's the best card. But really useful site. As far as Construct is concerned, I like Icy Veins. They have quite a few good basic decks too. If you're like a really, really new player, if you're a more competitive player, Reddit/competitive Hearthstone is probably the best place to go. They have a lot of good decks, and it's much more organized. Hearthpone's something you kind of want to watch because people will do what they'll hit legend and they'll take a legend screenshot and they'll put the deck that they didn't get legend with, so they can put like a funnier, quirky deck, and everyone will think it's really good. And you need to be really careful on Hearthpone.
Yeah.
The Eric Paladin deck, though.
Oh, Dirty Eric Sex Dungeon.
Oh my god. I didn't even know that was a thing before you guys.
Alright, so
I actually have a decent amount of decks on my Hearthstone if you want to check it out. It's just my username there is just Valm, VALM.
And if you guys kind of want a good idea of some competitive decks, there's not a lot of write-up, but I think he has 15 or 20 decks, so there's...
You have 2 for each class.
Yeah, so 18 decks. That's pretty good. So, for missed lore last week, we'll do it this week. I thought since TGT came out, it'd be kind of cool to touch on what preceded TGT, which is the Argent tournament, and kind of educate everybody on that. I'll also explain afterwards the transition to TGT, although it's a relatively simple one. So, in Warcraft 3, there was this guy named Arthas, and we'll talk about Arthas in another episode probably, but he did a lot of bad things, and he eventually became the Lich King. And he controlled Scourge, which are kind of like undead, and every time they tried to assault his fortress called Icecrown Citadel, not only would people die, everyone who died would be reborn as an undead. So it's actually really bad to even try unless you were sure you were going to do it. So they came up with this because you turned to an undead. So they came up with this thing called the Argent Tournament, or the Trial of the Argent Tournament, pretty much. And the idea of this was to have a tournament where all of these soldiers would come from like far off places and they'd fight each other, and they could find the best people possible to decrease the likelihood of somebody dying and turning into a scourge. Because if you died, then you had to fight against the person, which is really bad. And they wanted these tight-knit like combat units of like the best heroes from everywhere. And this kind of turned into two things. It turned into the Trial of the Champion. It turned into Trial of the Crusader. And Tyrion, the Paladin legendary, he's kind of the person that oversaw most of this stuff. But Trial of the Champion was a smaller thing. It's kind of what precedes Trial of the Crusader. If anybody played this in WoW, you probably remember it as a 5-man dungeon. But the notable Hearthstone cards in this are Confessor Paletrus, and she actually like resurrects a hero in this, which is pretty cool. And that's kind of what her Inspire mechanic comes from, where you heal and you summon a random legendary, where she summons a legendary, or she heals / summons a legendary person. And Eardrick the Pure is also a boss, so that's pretty cool. Black Knight, he's been in Hearthstone for a while, but he's the end boss of the Trial of the Champion. And he's notable because Lich King sent him as a spy to kind of, like, I guess, spy on everybody. So he's like one of the bad guys, and he's one of the bosses. Then you kind of progress, and you Trial of the Crusader, which is like, I guess, the second or third stage, depending on how you want to look at it. Like the first big, and it's like a tournament. So it's like, imagine the movie Gladiator, where you just have to fight like people upon people. And like the first big person or the first big people you have to fight are called the Beasts of Northrend. And Northrend is kind of where the Lich King is situated. And you fought Gormak the Impaler, 4/4 legendary, deal 4 damage if you have 4 minions on board. Acidmaw and Dreadscale, the 2 big worms, and they're kind of a combined boss, and that's kind of why they're combined in Hearthstone. If you play them both on 10, you kill everything, and they're really frustrating to fight. And you fight Icehowl, and his mechanic's really cool. At least in the game, he would like sit in the middle of the Coliseum, and he could charge as fast as he could at a wall, and everyone had to get out of the way, otherwise you pretty much got one shot. And that's kind of where he has the charge, can't hit heroes. But after that, Wilfred Fizzlebang, the new Warlock legendary, summons Jaraxxus. And that's where I am Jaraxxus, you are facing the Burning Legion, or whatever he says. That comes from...
You face Jaraxxus, Eredar, Lord of the Burning Legion.
Yeah, that's where this comes from. When you summon him in the Trial of the Crusader, that's what he says. And you have to fight Jaraxxus, which is pretty cool. After Jaraxxus, you fight the faction champions. I didn't see many noticeable Hearthstone cards, but there were a lot of them. After that, you fight Idris Darkbane, and I don't know how to say FJOLA.
Fiola
Lightbane, the twin Valkyr. And they're dark and light, and they have so many powers, it's kind of hard to figure out which one exactly was the Hearthstone mechanic that they both had. But the big thing is that they buffed each other, and you kind of like cycled between dark and light and had to deal with it. And that's where I think the buff mechanic comes in. That's kind of one of the big things I want to keep tying in, is like what they did in the lore and what they did in the game and how that relates to like the card. And then you fight a noob after the twin Valkyr. Like the floor disappears from under you, and then you have to fight a noob, and he's down there, and he just kind of throws spiders at you and impales. And I kind of remember a hunter having to shoot icicles or something. Maybe a different fight. I don't remember a noob that well. But he was like the last boss of Trial of the Crusader. And then after Trial of the Crusader, according to the people at the Hearthstone conference when they announced the grand tournament, basically they did Trial of the Crusader, and then they marched on Icecrown Citadel. Spoiler alert, you can leave now. But alright, they killed the Lich King. After they killed the Lich King, they had all these tournament grounds left there, and all of these like super famous heroes who fought in the tournament, and especially the people who like maybe weren't good enough to charge on Icecrown Citadel, like that 8/5 ogre chance to attack a random enemy. He stands out to me as not good enough. But they had all these people left on the tournament grounds, and that's kind of the premise of this, that they kept like this grand tournament going, and they had all these quirky people from all these faraway places. But it really started with the Argent tournament put on by Tyrion to defeat the Lich King. That's kind of the lore behind this expansion, which is, I guess, good to understand, so you kind of know what's going on, at least in the timeline, because this is Hearthstone Heroes of Warcraft. But any questions, comments, or concerns on that?
That's pretty cool.
Diablo cards where?
Diablo cards. Yeah, I'd like to see StarCraft cards.
Yeah, that's really cool. Because all that stuff that I have no idea, so it's really interesting to learn that stuff, especially like how I didn't even realize that a lot of their abilities actually tie in with how they played in other parts in WoW.
That's kind of how like most of the stuff works, though. Like Rag, he kind of throws random fireballs, and Alex Straza's the life binder, and that's kind of why she binds life. She puts you at 15. Ysera's the dragon queen of the Emerald Dream, and that's why she summons dream cards that are kind of emeraldy. Okay. And she has green drakes because she's queen of the green dragonflight. And Deathwing had Cataclysm, which he destroyed everything, and he is kind of by himself because he's leader of the black dragonflight and he's corrupted, and that's kind of what he does. He's by himself and he kills everything, and everything's kind of tied in like that. Him at Nestlingway, he traveled across continents and he just killed mass amounts of beasts through genocide. And that's what he does in game, although he's not as cool in game as he was in WoW. But no, all the cards are tied to Warcraft. You just kind of have to dig for it. But they are very close to the lore. I think the only thing I've seen that I really disagree with is Vol'jin, because Vol'jin's like a shadow hunter in WoW, and he's a priest in Hearthstone, or a priest card, which I don't really understand. Although I don't know where shadow hunter would fall as far as the classes are concerned.
What about Chromagus? Like, where is he at in terms of? Does he have a different faction that he has of like red, green, black? Well, it wouldn't be black, I guess it sounds like. But is he part of that or no?
Chromagus is weird. I didn't really get to fight Chromagus that much because I started playing a little too late, and he was like one of the original bosses and kind of like a weird raid. I did most of the Blackrock stuff, but I didn't get to like I didn't get to Chromagus. I did Rag. I did Major Domo. Or Major Domo. Major Domo makes you turn into Ragnaros, because when you kill Major Domo, you can... Major Domo is basically the person who summons Ragnaros. I don't exactly remember if you kill him or not. All the stuff from Vanilla is kind of... Or the first like original WoW is kind of hazy for me, because I didn't start playing until the beginning of the first expansion, kind of. But I've read a lot of the books, so I kind of know what's going on.
What about? I'm gonna ask too many questions. What about like this is the last one from me. What about Ren Blackhand? Because like it's interesting with like the dragon synergy. And since there's so many dragons going on right now, it's kind of a relevant card. Which is a 7-cost 8/4, and if the battle cry is if you're holding a dragon, destroy a legendary minion.
Mm-hmm. So like Blackhand's just kind of a guy who's always really confrontational, and he always like tried to get in everybody's face. He's really, really, really aggressive, and the orcs were kind of all in clans, and he's always trying to like become head of a clan, and he eventually became head of his clan. But I think it was during the Second War. This could be completely wrong, but I'm pulling from, I believe I read the book about this, and this is touches on Deathwing and a couple of other things, that he enslaved Alexstrasza, or the orcs enslaved Alexstrasza to use the dragons against the Alliance. And Blackhand was kind of part of that, and Blackhand was kind of part of that. So I think that's where it came from, that he enslaved Alexstrasza and the Red Dragonflight, and the orcs and the Horde used the Red Dragons to defeat the Alliance. We touched upon that in lore for the first episode, actually, that Ronan was one of the instrumental people of stopping Alexstrasza from being enslaved during the Second War. And when the Horde had control over her, I think Blackhand was one of the people who was kind of in control there. So Ronan's kind of who did that, and like that kind of touches on a point, like the more and more you learn, the more and more it ties together, and like all these people kind of like fought together and did things together.
And yet someone as jacked as Deathwing can get told to follow the rules, or killed by a dude with a big gun.
That's kind of like my biggest pet peeve about Hearthstone. Like my biggest memories from like games when I was younger, like Yu-Gi-Oh and stuff, is summoning these crazy god cards, and it's just like, imagine going back to Yu-Gi-Oh and summoning like Obelisk the Tormentor and just having like Big Game Hunter played.
Yeah,
it's like a 3-star. So I think Hearthstone's a little too heavy on removal. That's like my one pet peeve. But no, I think that about does it. If anybody has questions about lore, I can certainly do the research. Although I think I know most of it. Some of the books I read like 5 or 6 years ago, I'm hazy on. So like some of these off-topic questions I probably know, and I know like 90% of it, like 1 or 2 details might be wrong. So I don't get like too angry. But I'm pretty sure I'm right. So feedback at hearthofthecards.com, and thank you for listening.